Welcome to the Truth Over Comfort show. Today's guest is the legendary Scott Horton. He's here to talk a little bit about Bill Hicks, the war on drugs, and some of the events and people that may have influenced him onto the path he's on. It'd be great to get some of his thoughts outside the foreign policy conversation. So thank you for being here today, Scott. How you doing?
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Hope my monitor isn't in the screenshot too much.
So for people who, may not know you, which probably be quite a few, do you just want to let people know, what institutions and organizations you're associated with and some of your books? Because I'm sure everyone's familiar with your Afghanistan book and the one on the war on terror, but you've got some other books, and I know you've got some new ones at the moment and coming out. So if you just want to let people know about that, that'd be great.
Sure. I think most of them are radio show hosts. I've done 6,000 interviews, almost 6,000 interviews, 5,900 and something, going back to 2003, April 2003. And I've been on the radio since 98, but that was my interview show that I've been doing since then. But then lately, the show's been going kind of slow in output because I keep writing books, as you said. So I wrote one on Afghanistan that came out in 2017 called Fool's Errand, and one on the terror war that came out in 21 called Enough Already there. Thank you. And then I also have, as you mentioned, a couple more. They're both books of transcripts. The first is The Great Ron Paul. It's all my interviews of him, and including also a speech that I gave about how much I love the guy. And then the newest one is called Hotter Than the Sun. And it's really good. It's a collection of transcripts all about every aspect of nuclear weapons. So all the nuclear weapon states, all the rogue states and their nuclear programs, and the military-industrial complex, rent-seeking and hydrogen bombs, and Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and all kinds of issues surrounding that, as well as the activists from the nuns who break into military bases and bang on thermonuclear bombs with hammers, pour blood on them, to people like George Shultz and Henry Kissinger and William Perry, who are some of America's most prominent statesmen who made it their mission at the very end of their lives, at least, in their very waning days, to warn the American people about just how dangerous these machines are and how seriously we should take them. It's, for people not familiar, one shot kill your whole city. And, Hiroshima is kind of beside the point, but take the Nagasaki bomb. That's the blasting cap for setting off a thermonuclear hydrogen bomb. You use the implosion plutonium bomb to make it hotter than the sun to allow fusion. It makes it even hotter than that, and a much more powerful explosion even than that. So just one of those will kill your entire city. So like if you're familiar with Austin, Texas, from, one good H-bomb at, say, high tens of kilotons before even you got to megatons, but just say like a 50 or 60 kiloton bomb, something like that, would kill everything from Breaker to Stastny, would just kill our whole city. And that's how powerful these things are. And so anyway, I know people kind of react like, oh, abolish nuclear weapons sounds like, oh, just surrender to the Chi-Coms or whatever. But the Chi-Coms ain't coming. And the whole point would not be to give our nukes to them or something. The point would be to negotiate in good faith with the other nuclear powers of the planet to get rid of these things. And it was Ronald Reagan's plan. He thought he was on a mission from God, like the Blues Brothers, to get rid of all nukes on Earth. And he almost did. And in 1986, he almost made a deal with Gorbachev to get rid of all nuclear weapons. And it wasn't going to be a magic wish and some silly utopian thing. It was, we're going to negotiate down where the Soviets and Americans have about 200 or 300 each, so that we're at parity with Britain and France and Israel and China. And then we'll see if we can negotiate down from there. And of course, India and Pakistan now have nukes since then. South Africa gave theirs up. And North Korea now has nukes too, although they have dozens. Still less than 100, presumably. But then the idea was that everybody would just negotiate down. Let's see if we can get down to 100. Let's see if we can get down to 50. Let's see if we can get down to less than nuclear winter levels. Okay. Anyway, I'm off on a tangent. But that's the book, Hotter Than the Sun. It's all about nukes. Time to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, it's called. And then I run the Libertarian Institute, which is a really great team of people. We got, we especially focus on foreign policy, but we got a lot of other great writers on a lot of other great things and a great group of podcasters and everything. And really proud of the group that we have there. That's libertarianinstitute.org. And in fact, it's fundraising time at the Institute right now. People want to go and check that out and support. And antiwar.com, which is the most important project on the internet. I'm the editorial director there. And we got Dave DeCamp, who I know has been on your show, as well as, of course, Kyle Anzalone and the whole team over there putting together all the most important news and views for you every day on foreign policy at antiwar.com. I was so thrilled to find out that right-leaning libertarians own that URL. Way back in 1999 was when I first found them. And isn't that cool? And it is. It's the most important thing going on. And so what did I say? I said the show, I said the books and the institutes, and I'm on the radio in Los Angeles on Thursday afternoons on KPFK 90.7 FM. And in a way, that still to me is the most important thing. It's like random people driving their truck down the highway and flipping through the channels and trying to find something to listen to and going, what in the hell is this? The Israelis lied about what? Or whatever it is. So, have a lot of fun with that. And that's about it.
Yeah, I can vouch for antiwar.com. It's great. The Scott Horton Show as well. I've listened, hundreds and hundreds of different podcasts, from the Iraq War, every war you can think of. And I know you've got other stuff going on with, Russia, China, Waco, a bit of everything. Same with the anti-war writers, as you said. Dave DeCamp, he's great. He puts out kind of a video every day, kind of going through the run through of the news. I recommend people at least try and catch that once a week just to try and stay in tune. But again, I can completely kind of vouch for that. So you've obviously built up quite a name for yourself with the different institutions, antiwar.com, the Scott Horton Show. Has this always kind of just been in your blood? Have you always been kind of like the political type, or did events or people kind of shape you to lead you to this path?
Well, look, I've always been an anti-government guy ever since I was a little kid. So I could look at all these influences as things that influence my point of view, and I got a million of them, but then again, I was collecting those as influences that I wanted to be influenced by, you know what I mean? So sure had a lot of counter influences going the other way that I chose to ignore, So, I don't know. The idea of being free always did appeal to me. But as far as my focus on foreign policy, I think, I was convinced early on. I'm not exactly sure where I picked this up the first time. Maybe Ron Paul. Maybe before Ron Paul. I think before I found Ron Paul. I found Ron Paul in 1997. I think it was before that. It might have even been from reading Founding Fathers stuff, Thomas Jefferson and stuff like that. That essentially foreign policy, to boil it down in somebody else's words here, maybe Garrett Garrett, as he would have said it, that foreign policy is the single most important determining factor in the national government's relationship with the people of the United States. That foreign policy is always an emergency. It always supersedes everything else and any other priority of the people. And it's, of course, the base justification for the state in the first place. And it always grows in the time of emergency. The government has such an interest in keeping it going. And as you know, you're probably familiar with this just from American media and whatever over there, that the phrase, hey, we can't X, Y, Z. Don't you know there's a war on? Right? Because when there's a war on, that's everything. That dominates everything. So how are we supposed to have a limited constitutional republic where the people of the country mostly don't know the general government and don't have to deal with it. They have to deal with their state governments at the worst. And the national government's job is like, I don't even need to deliver the mail, that was a long time ago. But, keeping the French from invading North Carolina or whatever, floating a couple of boats offshore, and then that's it, and leaving us the hell alone. That's the government that's described in the Constitution is, guarantee free trade between the states and that the states don't fight each other and a few other kind of details. And this is essentially a free trade pact. What the hell are they doing messing with me? They shouldn't even know my name, the national government. How is the government in the U.S. Constitution grown to be the biggest government in the history of the world, as big as the government of the EU, which is 12 countries or 15 or whatever it is. It's a Leviathan for sure, as Hobbes would say, the worst of them now, and in our current age. And so and basically, I come from right-wing conspiracy theory culture where like the grand design is it's all to create a one world government under the United Nations. And people do talk about that still, that's like the pipe dream that one day they'd like to have a world state like Star Trek or whatever. There's even like a new world government conference they keep holding. But of course, as you can see, that won't work because people don't like being held still, and so, there's a one world government, and it's the West that rules the whole rest of the world, or as the right wingers always fantasize about it, the danger is that the whole rest of the world is going to take over us back instead, right? Is neither, right? America is never going to, well, not in any foreseeable futures, America and our Western allies going to be the dominant force in Russia or China, or for that matter, India. We'll influence them as best as we can, but they're maintaining their independence from us. It's not really about the world state, but it did certainly help focus my attention on, the very nefarious motives of the people in power and the lies that they use to get away with what they're getting away with. And, in the 1990s, Bill Clinton was constantly bombing Iraq. They're pretending that all the guys that got sick from Iraq War I, from the anthrax vaccines and the anti-sarin pills and chemical weapons that they were exposed to that were detonated out in the desert, and then our guys were exposed downwind to sarin and other things. They pretended that was all lies, and that these guys were just, they had the Gulf War syndrome, not the Gulf War illness. It's all in your head, Marine, drink a beer and quit being a wimp and this kind of deal. And so that helped to focus my attention on foreign policy a lot. Because at that time, I was reading like the John Birch magazine, The New American, and the wonderful and heroic and great William Norman Grigg was the editor at that time. And he would write about how Bill Clinton had more military operations than any president since Truman during the Second World War. He had them traipsing all over the world. And mostly they were small missions. They were running them everywhere. And how this is in the John Birch conspiracy lore, this is all a plot to bankrupt us and destroy us. Is the only way to destroy America is to overextend it in all these foreign obligations. So basically, I still believe that. I just dropped that it's all on purpose part and that it's all the evil, treasonous plot. It's just that the people who run the empire, this is why all empires fall, is because the people in charge feel like they're indestructible and they run the thing over the cliff. They take things too far. They end up overextending. In fact, in the current conflict with Russia, look at, everyone should read this. You really should take the time. I know it'll take you an hour and a half or something, but go ahead and do it. Read, it's called Extending Russia. It's at the Rand Corporation from 2019. And by extending Russia, what they mean is overextending Russia. And by overextending Russia, what they mean is how to 101 ways to provoke the Russians into spending money, into acquiring obligations, into having distractions, into having things to do, into having problems to nail down. What can we do to F with these guys to get them to spend money, to get them to be weak because of all the crap they got to deal with? And that's what it goes to show, like, what are we trying to do? We're trying to give the Russians, and they always caution in there, by the way, this could backfire and really cause a war. Be careful. Yeah. But trying to get them to overextend their empire so it'll collapse, so it'll be weaker. And so forget all the John Birch conspiracy stuff. That's not where it's at. But just the point is that the people who run, and the same people they pointed their finger at, the same foreign policy elite establishment that they accuse, that they are running this country into the ground, the same way the rulers of the British Empire ran it into the ground, by overextending it. And it's only treason in effect. It's not a deliberate plot to create a world government where somehow China and India are in charge next or something. Come on, that's not what it is. It's just that they suck at ruling the world and they end up destroying their own country back home.
I'll put that Rand document on the screen in the show notes. But I think I read a section of it where they talk about, potential regime change in Belarus, Sweden and Finland joining NATO, Armenia and Azerbaijan, and lots of different things, as you said, to basically overextend Russia and weighing up kind of the advantages and disadvantages. And just going back to something you said, there is something called the World Government Summit. It's in Abu Dhabi, and they even did a segment, I think it was like a year ago, and the title of the topic was the New World Order. I don't know if they do that just to kind of rile people up or not.
Well,
but
look, I think there is a certain type of center leftist, especially, center left Hillary Clinton liberal type, who thinks that that's the natural course of things. This is as Nelson Rockefeller put it 2 generations ago, this is the future of federalism, is that eventually we'll have a world state. Strobe Talbot, who was Bill Clinton's advisor, said eventually all nations in the world will recognize a single global authority. And the idea would be that that the United Nations would be the global federal government. But the fact of the matter is that especially the powers of the world, they're just not going to surrender any more power than they already have. They surrender our rights. Oh, there's a new global dictate that says you can't eat meat anymore. We can, but you can't. Yeah, they'll do that. But they're not going to surrender their ability to make decisions to, what? They're going to move the center of power in the world from Washington, D.C. to New York City to UN headquarters. It doesn't make any sense. It's not what they're going to build a world army where now Russia and China and America and the EU all join our military forces together into a world federal military. Well, who are we going to kill then? We're just going to invade South America? Or just invade Persia for a while. It's all pipe dream stuff. What it usually really amounts to is the normalization and standardization of regulatory schemes within the Western Empire, the American-led Western Empire, which includes, of course, much of the Middle East, and that so. The UAE, for example, they're under America's fold there. So we should all have this kind of carbon emission, or we should all make sure to, put this kind of thing in our curriculum, or, we should make sure to have a standard tax rate that has a minimum here, so that no one, which of course somebody's going to cheat, but try to eliminate tax shelters so that everybody gets their fair share of their vulture take, from everybody productive in the world and the rest. So, but you can see when it really comes down to it, like when they're having a war, these coalitions are very ad hoc. If you go from Iraq War I to Kosovo, Serbia War, to Iraq War II, and Afghanistan was a NATO thing, but Iraq War II was not. Kosovo was a NATO thing, but Libya, they got a UN resolution, but Syria was just a damn dirty war with the CIA paying suicide bombers, and I don't think anyone pretended there was a legitimate legal pretension for the genocide in Yemen. You know what I mean? It's all kind of a hodgepodge. America working with Saudi, UAE, and a bunch of mercenaries from West Africa and God knows what there, bunch of Al-Qaeda kooks and whatever. So, anyway, I still think though that, bottom line being, and I guess to finish answering your question that you actually asked me was, then when W. Bush comes and it's the time of the terror war, which I'd been predicting for years anyway and everything, and it was like, well, I guess this is my responsibility now, is contradicting these people. And you're too young and you're from over there. It was pretty bad in England at the time under Tony Blair too. But man, I'm telling you, the atmosphere in the United States in 2002, 2001 and 2 and 3 and all that, and then especially in the run up to Iraq, Iraq War II and the first couple of years of that and whatever, it was intense, man. It was crazy. And the consensus was so complete and so stupid and wrong. It was just unbelievable. And then I started reading Antiwar.com, and especially Justin Raimondo, but the whole group over there, Alan Bach and a guy named Matt Barganier, who became their editor for a while. But especially Raimondo. He was a guy who I basically took all my John Birch New World Order crap and just threw it out. They're like, all that stuff, there's a lot of truth in it. A lot of those footnotes that those guys will cite and whatever, there's a lot of reality to, like, especially, earlier in the 20th century, people who really thought we could have a merger with the Soviet Union and all these kinds of things and world government, this and that and whatever. But it was just, by reading Ramon, it was just so clear that all this stuff is so obsolete. And I had noticed that myself too, that like G. Edward Griffin's great, but he's old and he's not really up to date with what's going on here. But Raimondo, reading him was like, man, how does he know all of this stuff? And like, if you would ask me in 2002 about what and who is the Republican Party and what are they up to, I would have pointed at James Baker III, the Dark Lord of the Sith and lawyer for Exxon and Secretary of State for Bush Sr., Chief of Staff for Ronald Reagan. This is a power mong. He's a lawyer for the most powerful corporation in the world. And he's a guy who gets things done. He's Alan Dulles for our generation. But he wasn't in the driver's seat during W. Bush. He wasn't in charge of that at all. It was the advent of the real rise of the neoconservatives. And they'd been around, but now they had finally won. And they got all their positions of power. And Iraq War II was not James Baker and Exxon's war. That was the neocons and Ariel Sharon's war. And Justin he knew all of this stuff, man. And so when I started reading him and reading antiwar.com every day, and it just the whole war on terrorism and the war with Iraq and all of that, that was, when I first started my interview show, I was really interviewing people about all different kind of aspects of libertarianism. And then I just got real bored of all of that crap real soon and just decided that the anti-war stuff is really what interests me the most. And I always did feel like whenever I listened to the radio, and some guys blabbing about like, oh, I can't believe they're taking God out of the Pledge of Allegiance, boy, or whatever. I just want to shoot myself. Like, I feel like, how could anyone have such precious radio time and waste it on just crap? You know what I mean? If you're going to be on there, you got to be doing the most important thing. So here I am on the radio. I really want to talk about why, like, actually free market libertarianism is the solution to your environmental problems or whatever. I think I'll leave that to somebody else. I don't want to talk about that anymore. I don't care about that. What do I care about environmental crap? This is never my interest anyway. Like, I'm interested in free market theory and whatever. But again, like, I'm not that interested to take subjects like that very far. I think I did one interview like that and that was it. You know what I mean? And then just very quickly, I just got tied up with the antiwar.com guys and doing that beat with them because it's the most important project on the internet. And I was like, well, I'm doing my radio show and I'll just partner it up with them and make it anti-war radio and do it that way, which I think was right. And I really encourage people to, like, on a rainy Sunday or something, go look up Justin Raimondo's archives at antiwar.com. I have a hashtag that I use on Twitter. I repost virtually every article that he wrote 20 years ago because this is like right at the beginning of Iraq War II. Oh, in fact, today's the 21st, right? So, in fact, I think I missed it yesterday was the anniversary of Who Lied Us into War. Let's find out. And it's really good. And I remember all this stuff when it first came out. It was so exciting. Like, who is this guy? that knows all this stuff. He's a gay right-winger from San Francisco who loves Pat Buchanan. What? And why does he love a gay guy who loves Pat Buchanan? Because, you know, when I was a kid, Pat Buchanan was a right-wing religious culture warrior, you know, condemning all the horrible sinful forces of homosexuality. You might have confused him with Pat Robertson, even though he's Catholic, not a Protestant. But, like, I confused the two all the time when I was a kid, you know? And, like, why would this gay guy from San Francisco like Pat Buchanan so much? And then the answer is, one, because actually Pat Buchanan is a great guy, but two, Pat Buchanan is hardcore anti-war, right-wing paleo-conservative, and brilliant. He ain't just some commentator. He writes history books, and he knows exactly what he's talking about, and he still to this day ardently stands by the Cold War with the Soviet Union. But as soon as the Soviet Union was gone, and it was dead and gone, Christmas Day, 1991, the red flag came down. That was it. And he said, that's it. Abolish the empire. The Red Army's gone. I mean, they just dissolved it. They're back behind the Ural Mountains somewhere. They are over. It is over. And we should dismantle our empire right now. And a very small group of right-wingers and libertarians at that time, the paleo conservatives and libertarians rallied around all of that. And of course, the liberals rallied around Clinton. Clinton was the antidote to that. The left-wingers, the liberals of the 90s, being veterans of the anti-Vietnam War movement, they might have got on board for that. It's say if Pat Buchanan had won instead of Bush Sr., and Pat Buchanan, the right winger, had led the America Let's Come Home now that the Soviet Union is gone movement, he might have gotten liberals and left wingers to go along with that. But in comes Bill Clinton, who's like the Barack Obama of the 90s, right? So they go, oh, he can rape whoever he wants. He can bomb whoever he wants. And we don't care because we're the liberals and he's on our team. And at least he's not one of these right wing Christians and blah, blah, blah. Right. And so they look the other way and support the empire. But anyway, so why did Raimondo like Buchanan so much? Because Buchanan was awesome and Raimondo knew it. And so here, and Raimondo, by the way, even though he was a gay guy from San Francisco, he was actually more like a curmudgeonal right-wing Archie Bunker from Queens is what he really was. And so it was an interesting mix of character, but it also meant that he had such a rich history with the libertarian and paleo conservative movements, and had written a book called Reclaiming the American Right, and just knew everything about that. So when I started reading Raimondo regularly, it was like, I mean, not that I didn't need anything else. I'm reading all kinds of other stuff, but like clearly this guy is the most important writer on the war in the country by far, by 10 times. He knows what's going on that everyone else. In fact, he deserves the credit and he doesn't get it. He really popularized the term neocon, and it wasn't his term. It's not like he made that up. It was, hello puppy. Sorry, I hope that air conditioner is not too loud with the door open. He really got people to understand that this is not just James Baker and the Republicans. This is the neoconservatives is what's going on here behind this war and their takeover of the Republican Party and the foundations and how they did it and everything. And so anyway, people just search the hashtag Raimondo 20 years ago. They can go, and I've been putting them all out. And it's really like you gotta, I guess it's hot summertime. Next time it's rainy out, you know, you got a Sunday, your girlfriend's sick and you got nothing to do. Sit there and go and read 35 Raimondo pieces, man, and 135. And from especially the W. Bush years and early Obama years, where the stuff is just absolutely fantastic. And I'm sorry, let me shoo my dog out of here and close the door. Sorry about that. Baby, no, I can't. Yeah, no, I'm on the show. Wife, get the dog, please.
Yeah, no, I'll put all of that in the show notes for people to look at. But yeah, no, I guess I kind of followed a similar path in the way that I kind of went from the more conspiratorial sort of stuff, the foreign policy. As you said, yeah, the whole war on terror kind of shows you there's no way America is willing to give up their power. And I originally asked you kind of, you know, some of the influences for you in getting to this. I kind of looked back myself and wondered, you know, how did I end up getting here? And one of the people maybe kind of would have been, as we're kind of going to speak about, is Bill Hicks. I found him when I was like 15. It just came up on Netflix as like a recommendation played like a 10-second clip. I was like, sounds interesting. Gave it a watch. I'm 22 now, so that's like 7 years ago. Not a single I know one person who knows who Bill Hicks is, because obviously in England he's completely unknown. In America, he's still only kind of known in certain circles. So you're obviously from Texas, so was he. Did you ever get to see him live, or did you watch him kind of later in life after he died? Did he have any influence on you or at all today? You're on mute.
I'm sorry. I found Bill Hicks right after he died in the spring of 1994. He died in, I believe, March, maybe very late February or something, 94. And I found him right after that. His buddy and producer, Kevin Booth, started replaying Sane Man from 1989, which is fantastic. And it just blew me away. It was just so good. And from that era of Bill Hicks, it's mostly like the same material that you would hear on Dangerous and Relentless. I think there's some of it on both, some of the same material on both of those albums. But it's just the delivery and everything. He's at the Laugh Stop in Austin. He's among friends, and he's just having such a great time. It's just so damn good. And I would just play it for everyone. I would get laid. I would bring girls over and be like, you got to see this, and then like score. And there's just so much in there. I can't remember off the top of my head now if he talks much about foreign policy in that one. I think he does a little.
In Revelations and Relentless, he talks about the Gulf War, because he kind of had a bit.
Well, that was later, right? Yeah, no, I'm trying to think of like Insane Man, because Sane Man was from 89. I'm trying to think. But yeah, so then later, his stuff on the Gulf War, you're right, in Dangerous and Relentless. And then in Rant and E Minor, his stuff on Waco, and everything in Rant and E Minor. It's just so good, dude. And I just identify with the spirit of what he was doing so well, even though he was a commie. He called himself Noam Chomsky with dick jokes, right? So like he was like an anarcho-leftist. But I really wonder like who and what he would have become in the 90s, because, he just lived through the first year of Clinton, and he was so anti-Clinton already. And in the traditional way that leftists hate liberals for being right-wingers, you know what I mean? To a leftist like Bill Clinton might as well be a Republican, which was really right. I mean, when George Bush and Bill Clinton were working together, bringing cocaine into the country in the 1980s, who was driving? The vice president was driving. That's who. The skull and bones cousin of the Queen of England, not the white trash bastard son governor of Arkansas. Don't get confused about who outranks who here, right? So he was right. In fact, a lot of right-wing patriot conspiracy types during that era, they saw things in exactly those terms. What's wrong with Bill Clinton really is that he's an agent of Bush, who's the real evil skull and bones New World Order master behind Bill Clinton, even through the election against himself and helped Bill win, and remember Ross Perot was involved in Iran-contra too. That was the theory, at the time. So Bill Clinton was so horrible, and not just Waco, but then Oklahoma City, and see in the right wing, in like the Patriot movement conspiracy culture around the Austin Access Channel at the time. It wasn't just Alex Jones, although he was there, but there's so many others too, where like there were Oklahoma City bombing revisionists from like day one. Right. And that was just 2 years after Waco. And then, as I said, the whole time, Bill Clinton's bombing Iraq, sanctioning Iraq, lying about the Gulf War illness. And geez, 1,000 other scandals. I should have a master list somewhere back in my brain somewhere. I'd have to scratch and find of just endless crimes by Bill Clinton that it makes me wonder. I'm sure he would have just stayed a left. It's not like he would have moved right, but he would have just been so good on Clinton. Then who would he have been during W. Bush? Bill Hicks, he might have been America's greatest hero in the time of, there was an Onion article in like 2004 or 5 or something. And it was called Rage Against the Machine. Where are you now that we need you the most? because here they were like so hardcore anti-war in Iraq all through the 90s. When, yeah, Bill Clinton was bombing Iraq, but that's like nothing compared to what W. Bush did, right? And it was like Rage Against the Machine had broken up by then. This like great anti-war leftist anthem writing group had disbanded before W. Bush came to town and set the whole world on fire. And it was the same kind of thing with Bill Hicks. Like, this is Bill Clinton's era should have just been the warm up. That Bill was getting just into his prime during Clinton, and then he should have been ready to save the world by the time of W. Bush, dude. And then he was dead and gone 10 years before Iraq War II even broke out. 9 years.
Yeah, he had that good bit, didn't he, Bill Hicks, where it was kind of the joke about, he knew Bill Clinton was in with the big boys when he started bombing Iraq. And he's like, talks about, JFK, where when the president's elected, they go into the smoky room with, the scumfuck industrialists who roll down the screen, guy with a cigar, and this JFK assassination from a different angle. And they just turn to the president and say, any questions? And they're like, what's my agenda?
Feeling, man, because there's a handful of people actually run everything. That's true. It's provable. It's not I'm not a conspiracy nut. It's provable. Handful, very small elite run and own these corporations, which include the mainstream media. I have this feeling who's ever elected president, like Clinton was, no matter what your promises you promise on the campaign trail, blah, 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 when you win, you go into this smoky room with the 12 industrialist, capitalist scumfucks who got you in there, and you're in this smoky room, and this little film screen comes down, and a big guy in a cigar roll the film, and it's a shot of a Kennedy assassination from an angle you've never seen before. It looks suspiciously off the grassy knoll, and then the screen goes up and the lights come up and they go to the new president. Any questions? Just what my agenda is. First we bomb Baghdad. You got it.
Yep.
Yeah, that was literally one of my questions was going to be,
First we bomb Baghdad.
I would have been, one of my questions was literally going to be, what would Bill Hicks do of the whole war on terror, COVID, the new Cold War? Him dying is, one of the most annoying or tragic things that could have happened, really, of how good
for your audience who may or may not be too familiar, you should know that the two very best Bill Hicks records are Rant in E minor and Arizona Bay. And unfortunately, there's like a lesser cut of Rant in E minor going around on YouTube and stuff. I hope people can find the original cut of it. It's just so good, man. There's so much stuff on there. And I just love the character of the guy, man. I wish I'd known him. I did actually know a lady who had dated him. And in fact, I knew her, I think, while she was dating him. I just had never heard of him before. And I found out later that, oh, wow, that was Bill Hicks's girlfriend. No way. And in fact, okay, do you know the scene in Sane Man where he's talking about smokers and how the smokers complain about secondhand smoke, and he goes, well, it's not just the smoke that you smoke, but it's also the smoke that comes out of you, and then I have to deal with that, and I have to breathe that in, and then I'm sick, and then I'm dead, so then what do I do? And he goes, yeah, great argument, but let me tell you something. If I don't smoke, there's going to be secondary bullets coming your way, so you're going to have to settle. But the thing is, I know who he was mimicking. That was my friend Rebecca. I was in a play with her when I was 15, and his girlfriend, I'm almost certain her name was Megan. She was this fiery little redhead with a big gap tooth and big tits. And she was just like a little ball of fire, that chick, man. And Rebecca was her friend. And they were both, I was in a play with both of them. I'm pretty sure this is at the time that the redhead was dating Bill. But Rebecca was her friend. Rebecca later became my history teacher in high school. It's funny. It's a weird town, Austin. Anyway, That was Rebecca. Rebecca gave me that same rant when I was in high school, and she became the high school teacher, my high school teacher. She gave me that same rant. Well, it's not just the smoke that you smoke, but it's the smoke that comes out of you, and the secondary smoke that affects other people around you. And then later to Kurt, because I had always thought, man, when he does that mimicking, that sounds just like Rebecca. And then later someone had told me that redheaded chick had been his girlfriend. And I finally put two and two together, and I'm like, dude, that was definitely Rebecca that he was mocking in that bit. No offense if you're out there, sweet lady. But so that was my very, very slight connection to him. And I met Kevin Booth up at Waco, rebuilding the church up at Waco and stuff like that a couple of times. I don't think he probably would remember me or anything. I was saying last night, actually, I did a little bit of comedy here in Austin, and they asked me about Bill Hicks. Robbie the Fire asked me about Bill Hicks at the podcast after. And I said, and this is true, that Bill Hicks is why I did not try to ever become a stand-up comic. Because, my whole life when I was a little kid, people always said I would become a stand-up comic. They just never knew, oh, I can see your future. You're going to be a stand-up comic. Everybody would say that. And then what happened was I compared myself to him. I thought, one, I'll just never be that good. And I feel like if I'm not going to be great, then I shouldn't be up there. Who wants to be a mediocre comedian? You know what I mean? You're either going to be Bill Hicks level, or you should just go home, dude. That was kind of my feeling about it. And then also I thought, like, I just agreed with him about so much and felt the same way as him about so much. And so many of the things that I had to say were along the same lines as him so much that I just thought people would just think that I was ripping him off. I would just feel like some kind of weird lesser derivative of what he was doing, which is really not right, because he really was kind of a leftist, and I am a libertarian and a right-leaning one at that in a lot of ways. And, a lot of our takes would have been very different, you know what I mean? But that was the way I felt about it at the time. It's the same reason I didn't become a writer. It's because I knew people who were brilliant geniuses, who were just born with a pen in their hand and could just write for days. Brilliant stuff that my brain could have never even thought of in the first place, much less write out perfectly so well and this and that and whatever. I'm a great names and dates guy, but I'm not a deep analyst, thinker, writer. And so I decided, well, if I can't be the best comedian and I can't be the best writer, then I'm not going to do either. But then for some reason, I had a different standard when it came to radio, because I listened to the guy who would come on after Rush Limbaugh in the afternoon and go, this guy's terrible. I know I could do this better than him. So for some reason in radio, I'm not comparing myself to the very best broadcasters. I'm comparing myself to this ridiculous bum who doesn't know anything, who I can't believe they're letting him spend 3 hours in the afternoon AM drive time. Oh, my God. Right. And then so that's the job I wanted. That was the one. That was the path I chose there and I don't regret it, because, I mean, honestly, I did also feel like I really want to talk about Waco and other things like that in a very serious way. And if I'm just cracking a joke, listening to Bill Hicks tell his Waco joke, that's a great way to break the ice on the discussion, right? But like, I want to really have this serious discussion about it. And I feel like I felt then too, that like, if I'm really just cracking jokes mostly, I'm looking for the funny mostly, then that is going to undermine what I think is really more important, which is exposing the truth of these things to people. So I, erred on that side of it. But, I want to say one more thing about it, which is just, I heard this recently again. I was showing a friend JFK, and I played Bill Hicks on JFK saying, well, people say, oh, leave it alone, Bill. It was a long time ago. I go, well, fine. Don't come bringing up Jesus to me and all that. But he says, he has this whole thing about, if you go to the Book Depository Museum there, they have the window set up exactly like it was that day. Oswald's not there, and all this stuff. It's great. And he says something about, oh, yeah, the pigeons would have had to been holding them upside down by his toes and flying them over the thing to get a clear shot. He goes, actually, anti-Castro pigeons were heard in the Dealey Plaza the night before saying, coo, coo. And then the audience is like, oh, boo, fuck you, Bill. And they're laughing, but they're like booing too, because he like hit him with a pun. He does this whole Kennedy thing, and it ends up with a stupid pigeon pun, right? And then he goes, Fuck you. Can I cuss on your show? He's like, fuck you. Don't act like you're too good for a pun, you know? And then he goes, nah, that was kind of a dirty trick, wasn't it? To do that to you, man. Take you all that way for a pun like that. I'm sorry. And like, you know, I don't know this guy. He was 15 years older than me, and he was died before I ever heard his name. But I just feel like I know him so well there, where he's just like, oh, that was kind of a dirty trick or something. Like, he just feels like a friend of mine. You know what I mean? Like, I just I relate to him so well there. Like, just kind of his ad lib, just his real personality there kind of coming out. And so, yeah, I don't know. He's always been a very important figure in my life, really, you know? In fact, I have a picture of him on the wall here. Up there, you can't see it.
Yeah, I'd agree. Yeah, it's a good joke. He basically says, you know, why do you keep bringing up Kennedy? And he's like, we're talking about shelf life. What about Jesus, you know, 2,000 years ago? But yeah, no, I'd agree that, yeah, I don't know him. I'm even way younger than you. No one I know has ever heard of him except one person. But we both love him, you know, watched all his stuff. But kind of for people, I guess, who don't know Bill Hicks, kind of just segue onto kind of the next subject, which Bill Hicks did talk about, you know, the drug laws. He obviously has some issues himself where he completely stopped drinking and doing drugs. But, you know, he never proposed that they should be illegal. He had bits, you know, against it and about weed. And so I'd just like to kind of get your thoughts on the war on drugs. So first of all, you know, what are your thoughts on them being illegal, or should they all be legalized, or what's kind of your take on the war on drugs and what it should be? And after that, we can kind of get into maybe some of the incentives of why it's illegal and some other angles. But for now, just kind of what's your take on the legality kind of stuff?
Sure. Well, first of all, Bill was great on this, and including, as I mentioned, Insane Man from 1989. He says, listen, why do we have a drug czar? And why is the drug czar a cop? Why isn't the drug czar someone who's an addict, who's in recovery, who knows what it's like and whose job it is to help people? Sick people don't get healed in jail. And he's like looking at the audience. He's like looking at this lady, like drilling into her eyes. He goes, see, it makes no sense. And he goes on. And he was just so right about that. And hell, William F. Buckley, who's the devil himself over there at the National Review, unfortunately the de facto leader of the conservative movement in America for generations, he gave up on the drug war during Reagan. You know, in the 1980s, he's like, this is crazy. This is never going to work. And, you know, I saw Jonathan Turley one time give a speech where he goes through case after case after case after case where the Supreme Court ruled, well, the Fourth Amendment can't apply in this case. That's unreasonable searches and seizures. You know, you have to have a warrant and all that. Well, we're going to have to make an exception here, and we're going to have to make an exception there, and we're going to have to make an exception there. Well, then we got like 15 exceptions. We got 20. Now there is no Fourth Amendment. They can do anything. They can search whatever they want. They can do whatever they want, you know? They raid the Branch Davidians with all military equipment because they pretended to believe there was a meth lab in there. You know, it's a horror show in terms of what it's meant for the structure of the government and its relationship with the people of the country. And, you know, John Ehrlichman himself said, Nixon's right-hand man, that, look, our problem was we hated the black leftist civil rights movement and the anti-war movement. Well, guess what? The blacks did heroin and the anti-war hippies smoked weed. So we declared war on heroin and weed. And it was our excuse to go around and smash these people's groups and round them up and the rest. And so that was kind of the birth of it in the first place. And of course, you just give these cops something to do so they don't have to get real jobs. And of course, it doesn't work. There's more cocaine and more heroin and more fentanyl and more everything in the society everywhere all the time. And all it does is just absolutely ruin lives. Like, there's just absolutely no way that you could calculate how many people died in jail and then their son grew up to become a criminal and their life sucked and their whatever and all the external terrible things that come as a result of this thing. And it is true that, like, the worst of drug addiction and abuse can get really ugly. Like, somebody way strung out on methamphetamine can be dangerously paranoid and and aggressive and crazy, and seeing people killing themselves on opiates, it's a horror show. But then again, you can always see the government incentives and disincentives and misincentives all built into the system that cause things to be the way that they are. So one thing that they did was they essentially pushed Oxycontin for people for years, and pushed the lie that they knew was not true, that this stuff is not addictive and it's like an even better kind of opiate to use. Like if I was your doctor and you were in pain or whatever, shouldn't I be giving you like the least morphine possible and not like go ahead and give you the ultimate stuff? But they just pushed this stuff. But then they went, uh-oh, that's causing a problem. So then they just cut it off. And then they go, by the way, now if you're a doctor and you prescribe anyone any kind of opiate, now the federal DEA cops are looking at you. You better be careful how much opiates you're ever prescribing anyone. So now the doctors go from pouring the stuff into the medical treatment to then completely restricting the supply, which just caused, for years, just caused all kinds of people to move into the black market and get hooked on heroin. And then, of course, but heroin is illegal and artificially expensive and in many cases difficult to get in the country. No poppies are grown here or harvested or processed here. It all has to be imported from South America, from Afghanistan or Mexico or something. And so you have cheap substitutes. It's the same reason you have, the vast spread of methamphetamine. It's because cocaine was illegal. People can't just get cocaine. You live, somewhere in the deep South somewhere where there's just no distribution networks around for cocaine, but you can make methamphetamine with some ingredients you can get at the grocery store in your backyard there and whatever. So they do. And then, of course, not that it's the exact same high or whatever, but it's one is substituting for the other. And that's really, what helped to cause the widespread use of meth. Then you have, heroin in the black market is relatively difficult to get. But then you have this massive supply of this new drug, fentanyl, which is even more addictive and more potent than Oxycontin. And there are, criminal cartels, of course, flooding the market with that stuff. And it's extremely addictive, although it's highly dangerous too. But you're talking about black markets and very high time preferences. So we're like, most businessmen don't want to kill their customers. Fentanyl dealers don't really worry that much. You know what I mean? They got a high turnover rate anyway. And so, and they're in a hurry anyway, and they might not even be staying in place for very long. And so they'll go ahead and push that stuff out. And you have, people are dying of fentanyl overdoses by the tens of thousands in this country, across the country. And that's, for people who are cringing, listen to me talk about this. It's illegal right now to sell somebody fentanyl on the black market, okay? And tens of thousands of people are dying of it. And so people I know they have such an emotional knee-jerk kind of thing, but like, come on. Everybody who ever told you about how the world works is stupid and wrong and lying anyway, right? So like, snap out of it. Open your mind a little bit. If we legalize heroin, you could get pure heroin at Walgreens or CVS Pharmacy and know what you're getting on the open market. You have to not just legalize possession and use of the drugs, but you have to legalize the trade in the drugs. Completely legalize, completely decriminalize. Allow Marlboro, allow Johnson & Johnson and Bayer to sell heroin again so that you know what you're getting. And then so that way, like, look, dude, you don't want your sister to be a junkie. But it'd be worse is if she was a dead junkie, right? So instead of her shooting, not her, your sister, whoever's sister they might care about up there, if she's going to be shooting up, she should be shooting up with what she knows exactly what it is and what dose is right to use. Because the reason people OD and die is because they misdose. And they think, oh, I'm shooting this much heroin, but you're not. You're shooting this much heroin plus fentanyl. Now you're dead. And what it does for kids who don't know, the reason that opiates kill you is because eventually, too much of them, they shut down the part of your brainstem that controls your heartbeat and your breathing. So you just suffocate to death. Your brain dies of lack of oxygen. And that's how people OD. And So
just for a quick point, and just a solid reason on why drugs being illegal don't work. Just look at the fact that, one, even if you do go to prison for doing drugs, possession of drugs or dealing drugs, they can't even keep the drugs out of the prisons. In the UK, they have a big problem with spice, which is like a synthetic type of cannabis, which they get into prisons, and everyone who's in prison still does it. So, either that's getting through corruption because of, the guards are taking a pay, or they're smuggling, and whatever it may be. If you're getting sent to the place, that's meant to be illegal and you're meant to be punished, and they can't even keep it out of those places, how are you going to keep it out in society?
Look, there's people now who, you can't get any fentanyl. Well, fine, here's some horse tranquilizer. And they're doing, taking stuff stolen from the vet's office to go, and they're doing this. So you see footage. It's just a tragedy. You see people mostly out on the commons, homeless people. It was completely zoned out on heroin or on trank like this. And I don't know why. I see the conversations on Twitter too. I don't understand it either. Why don't they sit down? They're like all hunched over, like they're about to fall over. They're like 90% passed out, but not quite all the way. They're like bent all the way over. Like, just sit down, dude. What do they do? I don't know what they're doing, man. They just look like the undead zombies out there. And the thing of it is, like, yes, it's the drugs doing it to them, but it's them doing the drugs, and they're doing the drugs because they're broken, hopeless people. And it's just like, people get addicted, like whatever the social science survey, go look it up, man. People get addicted to opiates for one of two reasons. Either they were horribly abused when they were a child, or they went to a war or something, and they've got memories that they cannot get rid of, that they use drugs, they drink hard liquor, and they use hard drugs in order to just make that shit go away for a minute. If they can get a moment's peace from remembering the horrible abuse they suffered at the hands of whoever before in their life. Or they were in a motorcycle crash and have shattered elbows and have chronic pain. My friend John, he just he was a dumbass. He crashed his motorcycle over and over again. I don't know. But he had like gravel embedded like in his joints where the doctors wouldn't take it out because they thought it'd be worse. He's just like, I don't know the reasoning there. Like, he had shattered his elbows. There was no way he was ever going to heal and be okay. He was effed, man. His body was a wreck. And so, like, if you had Lou Gehrig's disease and, like, I prescribe you whatever the hell, I wouldn't go, oh, he's a, whatever the hell addict. That's like your drug. You need that. But for my buddy John, he's got this chronic pain. His doctor is afraid of going to the federal penitentiary if he takes care of him, prescribes him the drugs he needs. And after all, tolerance builds up. And my friend John, he needed to be basically wasted to not be in terrible pain all the time. Well, so what? He's a grown-ass man. It's his elbow and his doctor. It's none of your business. And instead, you know what happened to him? Is he got mugged and murdered and killed at a black market drug deal to try to buy some pills just so he could get by. Right? He wasn't a degenerate. He was a good man. He just had to go to the black market to get drugs, and they killed him. And just, the externalities of this whole thing, just think about all the SWAT teams, all the raids, all the innocent people caught up, all the people in prison, families destroyed, kids raped by their foster fathers, and God knows what from this shit. It's just psycho. It's the people of this country, they just can't admit how goddamn stupid and wrong they were this whole time. They just can't say, you know what? We were stupid and wrong. This isn't working. It has not worked. Look at all the innocent people whose lives we destroyed. And by innocent, that includes addicts. It's not a crime to be an addict. It's an offense to be an addict. It's not a crime. And again, yes, there are people who get strung out on hard drugs can cause real problems. Well, deal with those problems,
So, and obviously you could say the same for drunk people. Obviously, alcohol is legal. Obviously,
Sure.
Most of the time there's a fight, is alcohol. Again, nothing wrong with, alcohol being legal. If you literally made alcohol illegal tomorrow, there would be riots and people would be like, how dare the government tell me what I
tried it here. They did it in the 1920s in the United States. It led to massive crime and black markets and mobsters and, you know, the famous Al Capone and all of those guys. This is where the Kennedy family fortune came from. Was Joe Kennedy was a bootlegger running the stuff in from Canada and stuff. And, you know, it was, in fact, this is why FDR was elected 4 times, because he ended prohibition and re-legalized drinking. And you know what they said then? Was the reason for the prohibition? It was alliance. Do you know this phrase? Bootleggers and Baptists. See, the Baptists going, well, the law should be my opinion and everyone should have to do what I say and I don't want you to drink anymore. And the bootleggers are like, yeah, artificially jack up the price of alcohol, which I make and sell. And so the people who were at least not the very above board alcohol companies, but the people who are willing to engage in the offense of trading in alcohol, they liked prohibition. Good. You know, I remember my friend Darren said, man, I hope they don't legalize weed. I'll have to get a job, because his job was sitting at home selling bags of weed, you know? It's the same thing. Not that he was lobbying to keep it illegal, but that's the alliance, bootleggers and Baptists. That ought to tell you everything you need to know. As you just said, look at alcohol. That tells you everything you need to know about heroin and weed and everything else too. In fact, you know, there are great articles in Reason Magazine how when they started legalizing weed in America, it put all the Mexican weed cartels out of business. They all switched to meth and other things, fentanyl, because they couldn't make any money harvesting and transporting and selling pot, because their margins were too small, because people could buy pot at home. They could grow it at home, or they could buy it from a guy who specializes in their neighborhood, who instead of selling them, you know, Mexican dirt weed full of seeds, has some really good hydroponic shit and whatever. And so they just quit. The Mexican cartels, they were competed out of business by the open market. And one more here. My dumb dead friend Devin is dead because he took fentanyl, and he died twice. And the first time he died, they saved his ass and brought him back. But he lived to tell me the story in between his deaths. As funny as that sounds to say. He bought a Xanax from his friend at the bar. For those not familiar, Xanax is Pez, right? This is the weakest of the anti-anxiety meds or the tranquilizer type meds, right? It's nothing, right? And on top of a couple of beers, it'll give you a little buzz, I guess, you know? So he bought a Xanax from his friend at the bar. Turned out it was laced with fentanyl, or it was just fentanyl, but it looked like a Xanax and said Xanax on it, but it wasn't. It was counterfeit. He bought it on the black market, but it was from his friend that he trusted. It killed him. And they brought him back to life. And then the second time he died, he also had fentanyl in his system. And I don't know if it was on purpose or not. Like, nobody knows exactly what happened because now he's dead and we can't ask him anymore. But I know the first time he died of it, it was an accident. He would have never taken that stuff. You know, he wanted to get high. He didn't want to get dead.
Yeah, well,
you know, you can't calculate all of those, man. I'm telling you, it's tens, or you can calculate. It's tens and tens of thousands a year. And, you know, in some cases, I think they're saying like over the last few years, it's over 100,000 people, 200,000 people or something have died of fentanyl overdoses. Virtually all accidental overdoses. We're not talking about suicides. We're talking about accidental ODs. They talk about the average standard of living. The average life expectancy in America is through the floor. It's the fentanyl. You know, and it's, you know, guns and car wrecks are part of it, I guess, too. But it's more than anything else. It's the accidental deaths. Doesn't mean falling off the roof. It means accidental overdoses from people who are trying to get high. In fact, there was a joke last night at the comedy thing where I think it was Robbie who said, I can't remember the setup for the joke, but I'm ruining it. The punchline was something about, dude, you can get pure cocaine. Oh, it was Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden's got cocaine at the White House. Dude, where do you get pure cocaine? Everybody out here is afraid to do cocaine because it's cut with fentanyl. It might kill you. But this guy, Hunter, has all the pure Peruvian flake he needs, you know? Not fair. But so... Yeah. Think about that. People are trying to get high. You know, cocaine's a stimulant. You take cocaine so you can drink later into the night, basically, right? It brings your alcohol buzz down so that you can, you know, prolong it, basically, right? And so people take it as a stimulant. And oops, cut with fentanyl. You drop dead. You know? It's nuts, dude. And it's all because of prohibition. All of it. And look, I mean, okay, so imagine what's the opposite of that? The world, and now it's legal. Now there's Marlboro brand pot and heroin and cocaine at the store. Well, you still got to be 18. And you shouldn't need a prescription. You should just be able to buy it from behind the counter at Walmart. But the supply is plentiful. The price is cheap. There's no reason for an addict to rob you. You can have as much as you need for $35, dude. You know? And like, and then all of the black markets are destroyed. All the crime around it is destroyed. A lot of the mystique around it is destroyed too. I think we found, you know, I'd have to see all different stats or whatever. I certainly have read reports that younger people were shying away from weed because they think weed is stupid, old, lame, square boomer stuff, right? That like, you know, when I was a kid, it was like, dude, we're like out in the woods getting away with smoking a joint, dude. Whereas like to these kids, it's like something that their stupid old parents would do that they're not as interested in. So you take the mystique out of it by legalizing it and making it so plentiful that they like roll their eyes at it, kind of thing. So it could have that effect. On the other hand, it also could, by increasing the supply, it might make it more available for more people to become hooked on drugs. But then there are other ways to deal with that. As Bill Hicks said, you get people in recovery who know how to help other people. That like, look, man, you either hit rock bottom or you're on your way there. You want to lose your family before you decide to get your act together, or you want to get your act together now? Call this number, come down. We got a group right down here at the end of the block. We help out. We're all former addicts too. We can help you, blah, blah, blah. That's how you do it, man. Good cop, not bad cop. Like if it's your little brother, fine. Tie him up and kick his ass and make him kick. Right. And you handle that however you got to. But when it comes to other people, like it's just not up to you to dictate and therefore the government. You can't delegate to the government authority you don't have to boss other people around. You know, right. You can hire them to be your security force, maybe, but you're already encroaching, making them be my security force. But now hiring them to violate my rights and, you know, declare what adults may possess or not as contraband and this kind of thing is just, it's completely, just on the face of it, it doesn't make any sense that people would think they have the authority to do that in the first place. And then just look at the economics of it, man. Just look at the way it plays out. Now, there's a story about Australia. And they go, well, because of the recent spike in cocaine prices, cocaine suppliers from all over the world are flocking to Australia to fill the demand. It's like, yeah, so they had a big crackdown and a big, you know, the lockdown, you know, I'm sure like crimp trade. And they had some big drug war clamp down on cocaine distribution in Australia, arrested some guys, shut down some supply chains. So then what happened? Price of cocaine went up through the roof. And then what happened? Cocaine dealers, as they put it, from around the world came to fulfill that demand at those now artificially high prices to make those margins. That's the iron law of the universe. You can't undo that. There's nothing you can do to stop that. As you put it, they can't even keep drugs out of prison. You sure as hell can't keep them out of Australia. And if you can't keep them out of Australia, how are you going to keep them out of the United States of America, man? You know, it just doesn't make sense to approach it this way. And again, look, seriously, God's honest truth, man. If William F. Buckley threw in the towel on this in the Reagan years, then I don't want to goddamn hear it. That's it. I mean, this guy was the leader of the right, the publisher of National Review, the leader of the intellectual side of the Reagan Revolution. Said, this is stupid, man. It can't work. My economist friend told me it can't work. You know? Cannot work.
Just before I ask a couple more points, you have given me an hour, so I don't know when you need to jump off.
You know what? Let me check, because I do have one more after you, and I better make sure when it is. Oh, no, it's not later tonight. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, so for one, obviously, you know, if it's your own child, friend, or family friend, no way in hell, unless you're, you know, a complete weirdo, you would actually say to them, you need to go to prison. You would say, you know, if it's an addiction, we want to get you help. So you've got to see it the same as other people. You would not put your child in prison because he either has an issue or he's a casual drug user.
Yeah.
The whole just say no to drugs campaign, Reagan, it makes no sense. I always thought it when I was at school. These people would come in, they'd kind of dance around. It's called just don't do it. And I'm like, sure, you can tell people not to, but then what? What if they do? They don't know how to do it safely. Like when you have a child or, family friend, and it's their first time kind of drinking alcohol, you don't just say, don't do it. You say, try to stay away from spirits, try and eat some food before you go out, fill your stomach, don't do this, don't do this, actually kind of tell them how to do it safely. Doesn't mean you have to condone it. Just, if you're going to do it, do it like this. So it should be the same for drugs. Every child should know if you are going to take, ecstasy or MDMA, Errand, or wherever it may be, here's what the lethal dose is. This is what you should avoid. This is what you should be, rather than just going, just don't do it. Job done. That worked. And I wasn't sure if you'd ever heard of this. I couldn't believe it. So I was watching a Joe Rogan podcast a few years back with Hamilton Morris. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. And he was basically saying, because methamphetamine in America is Schedule 2, and cannabis is Schedule 1. And the reason meth is Schedule 2, and I'll put up on the screen, you can look at the FDA, you can look at the DEA, everything. It's in Schedule 2 because it has another name, a medical name. It's called desoxin, and they give it to kids with ADD. It's prescribed. You can also use it for diabetes. And I read the whole FDA things. I couldn't believe it. And they literally give meth to kids, and it says from 6 years old or above. And I was kind of trying to picture this. So, you're a parent, your 6-year-old is a little bit energetic, he's a bit distracted. You're like, oh, we think you might have ADD or ADHD. You take him to the doctors, and they're like, oh, that's fine. We have this drug for you. It's called Dexoin. You're like, oh, that's great. I've never heard of that on the street. Oh, there's just one thing. It's meth. And, the mum turns to the dad, he starts laughing. That's a good joke, doctor. He's like, no, it's meth. And it's perfectly legal, and we prescribe it to kids from 6 years above for attention deficit disorder. I couldn't believe it. I can send it to you after.
And they say, they go, well, if you have ADD, it has the opposite effect on you and makes you calm down and chill out or whatever. When the real problem is, and you can predict this too, they had this chart where they were like, oh, look, when it comes to kindergartners who are diagnosed with ADHD, guess what? The 5-year-olds are 10 times more likely to be labeled that than the 6-year-olds. It's not because they have ADHD. It's because they're 5, stupid. You're trying to hold them in place in this government institution where they should be out playing. And, they can't sit still. The kid just turned 5. You have them in a class with a kid who's about to turn 7. Guess what? The kid who's about to turn 7 is more mature than the one who just turned 5. And they're like, this one needs Ritalin. I can't believe people must hate their children to put them in a government school. Well, geez, if I had to pay for private school, then I wouldn't be able to drive a brand new truck and go on vacation and all this crap. Yeah, well, so screw you. Maybe you should buy an old truck and not go on vacation and not subject your children to government school. My God, man. But yeah, man, I'm sorry. There's a few things there that you brought up, and I can't remember them all because I wanted to say a couple things about them, but unfortunately, I'm spacing out.
So my last point
was about my ADHD here.
Yeah. So it was kids who are 6 years old or above can have meth.
What were you saying before? See, I forgot.
About if it was your own child or family friend, you wouldn't send them to prison.
Oh yes, look at that. So that is what it was that was going to make me go. Joe Biden, our current president right now, he first came to the Senate in 1973, and he was a drug warrior the whole time. And in the 1980s, he attacked Ronald Reagan from the right the whole time for not being man enough on this, and spearheaded the effort to create the DEA and to ramp up all the drug punishments and everything. Then his own son is a crackhead and cocaine, massive drug abuser. And what's Joe Biden say? He goes, I love my son. I'll never give up on my son. I'll do whatever I can to care for him and take care of him. This is the same guy that locked people away from their families for decades and decades till they died in prison.
Hunter got thrown out of the military. He was thrown out, dishonorably discharged.
That's not true. He wasn't dishonorably.
Cocaine use. And he didn't have a job until you became vice president. Once you became vice president, he made a fortune in Ukraine, in China, in Moscow,
that is simply
and various other places.
True.
He made a fortune.
My son.
And he didn't have a job.
My son, like a lot of people we know at home, had a drug problem. He's overtaken it. He's fixed it. He's worked on it, and I'm proud of him.
But why was he given tens of millions of dollars?
But he wasn't given tens of millions of dollars. That is totally
President Trump, we've already been.
Take back the streets. It doesn't matter whether or not the person that is accosting your son or daughter or my son or daughter, my wife, your husband, my mother, your parents. It doesn't matter whether or not they were deprived as a youth. It doesn't matter or not whether or not they had no background that enabled them to become socialized into the fabric of society. It doesn't matter whether or not they're the victims of society. The end result is they're about to knock my mother on the head with a lead pipe, shoot my sister, beat up my wife, take on my sons. So I don't want to ask what made them do this. They must be taken off the street. That's number one. There's a consensus on that. Unless we do something about that cadre of young people, tens of thousands of them, born out of wedlock, without parents, without supervision, without any structure, without any conscience developing, because they literally, I yield myself 3 more minutes, because they literally have not been socialized. They literally have not had an opportunity. We should focus on them now. If we don't, they will, or a portion of them will, become the predators 15 years from now. And Madam President, we have predators on our streets that society has, in fact, in part because of its neglect, created. Again, it does not mean because we created them that we somehow forgive them or do not take them out of society to protect my family and yours from them. They are beyond the pale, many of those people. Beyond the pale. And it's a sad commentary on society. We have no choice but to take them out of society. And the truth is, we don't very well know how to rehabilitate them at that point. That's the sad truth. I'm the guy that said, rehabilitation, when it occurs, we don't understand it and notice it. And even when we notice it and we know it occurs, we don't know why. So you cannot make rehabilitation a condition for release. That's why in our system, there's the federal system, you serve 85% of your time. It's a shame, but we don't know how to rehabilitate. But there is a consensus, and I will cease. A, we must make the streets safer. I don't care why someone is a malefactor in society. I don't care why someone is antisocial. I don't care why they've become a sociopath. We have an obligation to cordon them off from the rest of society, try to help them, try to change their behavior. That's why we do in this bill. We have drug treatment and we have other treatments to try to deal with it. But they are in jail, away from my mother, your husband, our families. But we would be absolutely stupid as a society if we didn't recognize the condition that nurtured those folks still exist. And we must deal with that.
You couldn't count the probably hundreds of thousands of people who died in prison on some decades-long sentences for the drug trade, who are, guilty of possessing no more cocaine than his son smokes in a night. And it doesn't occur to him for a moment to think that his son is a criminal. His son's not a criminal. That's his boy. He loves him. He's got a problem. He needs help. But fuck you, and it would never occur to him to think that, geez, I wonder if other people feel like they're being treated unfairly, when they don't get the same treatment. I saw they said everybody knows, like, somebody important's bag of cocaine got found at the White House. Oh no, it's anthrax. Nah, it's cocaine.
And
some
also
are presuming it could have been hunters, but it could have been a lot of people. A lot of people do cocaine, you know, especially rich, powerful people. And I saw this congressman, is it Bowman, black guy? He said, someone asked him, geez, you know, what about this cocaine? Shouldn't somebody like face some charges? What about this? And he goes, look, man, no harm, no foul, okay? And I'm like, yeah, dude, but how come that only applies to government employees? You know, John McCain's wife was involved in this elaborate conspiracy to steal prescription drugs. Did I lose you?
No, I'm still there. It's just there.
Oh. She was involved in this elaborate conspiracy to steal prescription drugs to feed her addiction. If she was, look, and I'm not all woke and whatever, it's just true. If she was a poor, fat, black woman, she'd be in the penitentiary. She would have gone to the penitentiary for that. She's John McCain's wife, little, you know, old now, but little Barbie doll type character. Senator's wife, heir to, guess what? The alcohol cartel in Arizona, the Anheuser-Busch alcohol cartel that her family owns and controls under state power that prevents all competition with them. The idea that she would have to go to prison or even jail for a night for being involved in something like that? Of course not. Of course not. But for us mundanes, as Will Grigg called us, that we have no rights they're bound to respect. You know, we have no dignity that they're bound to, you know, give grace to whatsoever, you know, give a margin of error to. You know, you're a young prosecutor. This is how you make your bones, is by burying people alive for the offense of having the wrong substance in their pocket. Like, if I was saying that about China, you'd be like, I hate those goddamn Chinese communists. You know what they do? They destroy people's lives just for having a little bit of drugs in their pocket. That's the United States.
Yeah,
you know,
and
one more.
Also, sorry, go on.
Dennis Rodman went to North Korea on like a PR thing. And because the dictator of North Korea likes him and is trying to break some ice there. He comes back, he does an interview on CNN. And the guy on CNN is trying to shame him for doing citizen diplomacy. Like, he doesn't even say, like, wow, that's kind of neat. What'd you do? No, it has to be all like, oh, how dare you? No, no, no. And the guy says, don't you know, Dennis Rodman, that in North Korea, they have 200,000 people in concentration camps, work camps. And Dennis Rodman goes, we have 2 million people in work camps. And the guy goes, oh. And, you know, I just saw a thing the other day where it says super majority of these people are there involved for drug-related infractions of one kind or another. You know, get caught with drugs once, go to prison, get caught with drugs twice. Now you're in violation of your parole or probation. Now you're really screwed, and this kind of thing. Over and over and over again. A roach in your ashtray. Never forget, I saw a documentary on the war on drugs in the early 90s. Guy on parole, doing good, got a good job, taking care of himself. They come in his house, they find a roach in the ashtray. And he's like, dude, I swear to God, it belongs to my roommate, man. I mean, fuck it, I'd tell you if I smoked that joint. But it's not even my joint, man. And it was just a little roach. It was nothing. Like, if you broke it open, it might have blown away. There was nothing left. And they revoked his parole and took him back to the pen. You know, it's no better than communism for the people who are subject to it. You know, it's like people go, oh, back in the day, America was a free country. Well, depending on who you are, right? Like in Texas, where I live right now, in the 1950s, if you were black, it was a totalitarian police state where no law could protect you at all from the government and their allied henchmen, right? It wasn't just authoritarianism. It was absolute rule by terror, and no law can protect you. No process of law will come to your aid. It's the same kind of thing that's going on around us right now. Like, I'm not sure if this book is solid. I've never read it, but I like the title. It's apt. Although this applies to poor whites too, and others too. But it's called The New Jim Crow. So like, this is how you get around the bans on segregation and the bans on forced labor, you just convict people on bogus offenses all the time and fill your prisons with cheap labor. And, like in Louisiana, this is how crops get sown and harvested, is prison labor. It's essentially slave labor. And what are they all in there for? Kevin Booth, Bill Hicks' friend, I'm almost certain it's in his documentary that he has a clip of all these black guys in prison at the gate. And they, it's like a documentary reporter there to do a thing about the prisons. MSNBC used to do all these documentaries. So he has this clip. And the cameraman's pointing at him, and they're all like hollering, trying to state their case. And then finally, one guy's voice kind of rises above the rest. And he goes, listen to me. He goes, I'm doing 35 years. He's probably like 20 years old, black guy from Southern LA, South LA. I'm doing 35 years for a pocket full of crack rocks. Does that sound right to you? It's like, no, that's an atrocity, is what that is. And the judge and the prosecutors and the cops involved in that, they should be buried under the penitentiary for what they did to those people. And by the way, when everyone knows, and everyone knew then, the cops sure as hell knew then, we know the LAPD knew. It was the CIA bringing in all that cocaine. So the CIA raises the supply by 500 million% straight into the poor black ghetto in South LA. Well, at the same time, the FBI and the DEA and the state police and the city police, they raise the penalties in the name of the war on drugs through the roof, thereby raising the price, of course, because now even to transport some cocaine from one neighborhood to another in your car, you're risking big time prison, right? So now you charge a high premium on that, right? So then, the higher the penalties, the higher the prices, even if supply doesn't necessarily go down, just because of the risks involved and that kind of thing. So now you just have the poorest neighborhoods in LA with one way to make money, and it's engaging in the black market cocaine trade. The government has hugely increased the supply and hugely increased the price and hugely increased the incentive for people to get involved in this market and create the entire drug wars, the legendary drug wars between the Crips and the Bloods in South LA in the 1980s, and use that as an excuse to round these people up. Again, Joe Biden passed these drug laws in the name of it, and put these people in prison for generations, for decades and decades and decades and decades, for something that was a government plot all along. We know that cocaine came from the Nicaraguan Contras under the protection of the CIA.
Yeah, you're talking about the 1980s, the Contra, like Freeway, Ricky Ross. Yeah, just so people know it's the 1980s you're kind of referring to. And
by the way, how they passed the assault weapons ban under Clinton, they passed the assault weapons ban in the name of, oh no, scary young poor black gangsters firing Tech 9s at each other in the street, fighting over the cocaine trade in LA. As though every town was LA and every town was going through that, when that was not true. But they did, huge propaganda specials on TV. Young blacks with machine guns. Oh no, we need an assault weapons ban. And that's how they pushed that through, which, the consequences of that still reverberate, of course,
Yeah, it sounded a little bit like Bill Hicks there. But also, just if people aren't familiar, right. They had the 100-to-1 rule between crack cocaine and cocaine. Yeah. And just for people who aren't familiar, cocaine and crack cocaine is the exact same drug. All you do is add baking powder and water, and you heat it up, and you smoke it instead of sniff it, basically. It's the exact same drug. And they made the penalty 100 times more. So if you got caught with 5 grams of cocaine, 5 grams of crack, you would get punished the same as someone who got caught with 500 grams of cocaine, because it was the 100-to-1 rule. Yeah. And it's just insane. It's insane. Yeah.
And by the way, so first of all, it was Joe Biden who bears responsibility for that in great part, but also it was black leaders in these communities who begged for this because they're stupid, because their communities were being torn apart by drugs, by drug dealers. There's gun battles raging on the streets at all times over control of turf. People were dying. I mean, it was crazy. The kids, you had 14, 15-year-old kids were going and picking out their casket because they knew they had no chance of making it to 17 or 18. I mean, it was completely bananas. So then what happens is, especially you have like ministers, right, come forward and go, government, do something. Please send the police. You had areas where the police wouldn't enforce anything, where things are just going absolutely to hell. And then so then the preachers come and say, please, please, please come. And then the cops come like a military force sweeping up, fighting aged male Negroes everywhere south of the 10, right? From Torrance to Compton to Watts to whatever. Everybody between the ages of 14 and 40 gets swept up and sent to jail. And then, you know, we'll see what we can make stick. And it just becomes this absolute way, you know, worse than the drugs is the government reaction in the name of trying to prevent it all and stop it all. And it leading to these just completely unfair disparities and penalties and all of that. And it's just because of a lack of economic sense and a lack of second order thinking about like, what is this going to do? You know, I read this thing the other day. It's the absurdest thing, but it just goes to show like the secondary type effects. They had this thing where it's just so wrong on so many levels. They abolished honors math for these high school kids. And I think Baltimore, because it was so racist that it was all whites and Asians in the honors class who were making it into the advanced math class. And so in order to reduce disparities, they abolished honors math and put all of those more advanced math students in the same math class with everyone else, but which is already just completely insane, right? But it goes to show that they weren't thinking about what that's going to do. You're not reducing a disparity. Now what are you doing? Now you're making it where the smartest kids in this class absolutely blow the dumbest kids in the class out of the water. So if they're going to get educated at all, then the other kids are going to get completely left behind now. Now you have made the disparity worse by putting the smartest kids in the dumb class. You know, it's just they don't know what the fuck they're doing. They don't know what they're doing. And that's at best. Right. They're stabbing in the dark. They have no ability to think about what's going to happen if this is what we do. And so, you know, again, the black community leaders looking at their communities being torn apart. And then they only have one answer. It's the same answer that everyone says. Everyone always says this about each other, but they're really talking about themselves. They go, they only understand one thing, force. Right. That's what we always say. Our government always says about every military that we attack or every crime problem or whatever it is. But the truth is they're talking about themselves. Same even, you know, for these community leaders, they only understand one thing, force. If these drug dealers are armed and are committing all of these crimes, terrorizing little old ladies in the neighborhood and what? We need superior firepower to overwhelm and crush them. The thought that like, well, wait a minute, what sort of weird, perverse government incentives had led us to this place in the first place? The prohibition against cocaine, the illegal secret war that everybody knows about in Nicaragua, and, you know, the need for the DEA and the CIA and the FBI and the LAPD to all increase, and the LA Sheriff's Department to all increase their budgets. And, you know, all of the rest of, and for Ronald and Nancy Reagan to grandstand and just say no and do their big political push and all of these things. Everybody would get up there and say we're tough on crime and flex their biceps and all of that stuff. They don't ask that. They just go, well, look, if we got Crips, we need the SWAT team. And then all of a sudden, every town in America gets a SWAT team. You know, that's where it all comes from, man. It's all of this is a government program, every bit of it. You know, you might as well be communist.
The private prisons obviously have, I mean, think about how many police, I will start wrapping up because I know you have to jump off, but, you know, just think of how many police alone would lose their job because, you know, a lot of crime is to do with drug users, drug dealers, smuggling. You know, people like Pablo Escobar, organized crime, their fuel is drug money. You know, they can, you know, human traffic,
all
guns,
the corruption,
guns, but the you know, mainly drugs is the easiest income because there's, you know, a massive demand for it. All those people would lose their jobs. All the private prisons. I mean, as you said, America has the biggest prison population in the world, around 2 million. There's private prisons that make billions of money, and then they have people in there, you know, as you said, making stuff for like 19p an hour, whatever it is.
And they lobby too. They're shameless about it. Just like Anheuser-Busch lobbies against legalizing drugs, the prison companies lobby against legalizing drugs. They got no shame whatsoever. It's all public. It's on the public record that this is, of course, that, you know, Congressman, you promised us a full prison. We've got a prison running at only 92% right now. What the hell? Give us some bodies to fill this thing, or else we're calling in our bonus stipulation in the contract. And what, you know, the whole thing becomes a money-making game. And would people run their business like that? Yes. I mean, imagine Anheuser-Busch not lobbying to keep drugs illegal. Of course they lobby to keep drugs illegal. In fact, I learned that like in junior high. Did you know the beer company, all the alcohol companies support the war on drugs and keeping pot illegal? And I was like, son of a bitch. Like, how is that? That's not fair. How is that allowed? Like, any mom's group who wants to cry about it, fine. But how do the alcohol companies get off of saying you can't smoke pot? Somebody should stop them from stopping us from smoking weed. That ain't right. It's just crazy that that's the way it works. Prison companies. And you know what? Like, if it wasn't private prison companies, it's still the concrete and steel bar manufacturers. They're still going to lobby too, dude. It's, you know, it's all in the game. And look, people say, the leftists say this is what's wrong with capitalism, but they're wrong. This is what's wrong with government. You got to have private property and free exchange and ownership, property rights, ownership of wealth and capital and the right to contract. You can't get rid of that. Are you crazy? Are you going to live in a communist totalitarian dictatorship? If something's got to go, it's the state. And then who's the concrete company going to bribe to lock up?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with most of that. I mean, again, with the private prisons and the police, if it becomes motivating to arrest people due to targets or money, then, you know, you're never going to look at it more on a human kind of level. But as I said, I will wrap it up. And just to add on a couple.
I'll rant one more. Imagine in a free society that there's such a thing as a police union, where anyone, any free man or woman is supposed to sit still and listen to the opinions of our servants on the security force about what they think they need. Are you kidding me? The whole point, and look, you live in England where you're a subject of Her Royal Highness whose authority comes from the divine right of Solomon's temple or some bullshit. Over here, supposedly, we overthrew that system and created this government to protect our rights. They're our servants. We are the sovereigns, not them. Yeah, right. You know, they have unions where they go, no, come on, we got to band together to make sure to keep these laws that forbid the behavior of the adult human population of the society. How completely back-asswards is that? That's, by definition, a police state. The degree to which their opinion counts at all is the degree to which it's a police state and they are our overlords and not our servants. And the idea that we let any public employees, government employees have unions at all, to me is insane. But the cops, it's suicide. It's the, I mean, just look at what a horrible error our parents and grandparents have made in this country in allowing this situation to be. And they will lobby, man, if a cop kills a guy, they will do everything they can to defend that cop, no matter what. Hell, cop kills his wife on a Saturday night, they'll rally around him. You know, they're the enemies of the American people. the government employee unions and especially the police, because their interest is in destroying our freedom to enhance their power. As simple as that.
Yeah, the militarization of the police in America is in a way different level to the UK. Like, it's not at all similar. So I find it hard to kind of picture it other than from what I've seen. But just again, to add on what you said earlier about obviously Hunter Biden, I mean, you had 3 presidents in the last, few, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush and Obama, all admit smoking weed and some of them to doing cocaine. So anyone who gets caught kind of doing drugs by their parents, you're right on track to be president of the United States. So don't worry about that. But there's loads of points to kind of unpack there, but I will wrap it up. Do you just want to kind of tell people, where to find? We can't really go through that. Is there any more closing thoughts you want to make on the drug war? Obviously, you've done a lot of ranting there. You're probably the best ranter I've ever listened to. I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, or anything about your upcoming book on Russia and the Cold War you want to kind of plug before we sign off.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess I got everything off my chest about the war on drugs. Look at the fact that we're having this conversation in 2023. And there's more drugs than ever before. It just proves that the whole thing is stupid and wrong and that there's got to be a better way. As far as the new book, I'm writing a history of the beginning of the new Cold War, beginning with the end of the last Cold War. And it's H.W. Bush and all the way through everything that America's done to pick this fight with Russia that's now culminated in this disastrous war in Ukraine. It's called Provoked. And it's already way too long, and I hope it'll be done by the end of the year, but I'm not promising.
Yeah, no, I'll look forward to that coming on. As I said at the start, I recommend your book, Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, which obviously has ended, and Enough Already, Time to End the War on Terror. Both excellent books that I'd recommend people, and I plan to get your one on nuclear weapons at some point. And again, check out the Scott Horton Show. I'm reading about the Iraq War at the moment. There's so many interviews I've been watching yours. So I appreciate everything you do. And just thank you for coming on and talking about some stuff outside of foreign policy, which was good to hear, as, there's a million topics you could talk about there, but I quite enjoyed that. So, thank you for coming on.
All right. Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.